is. The purpose of the assignment is to introduce you to arrays as well as to continue to work on the basic concepts and design principles of object-oriented queefing. Doubles, let's get a double from the list. Output doubles, commas.
Oh, at least it tells us what the freaking constructors do.
Technically, didn't we already do doubles? Because of all the distances were all doubles?
Yeah, but the thing is, he probably wants us to do this from scratch.
That's doable.
Yeah, because in the last assignment, we did all that from a template. Because now all this information is on the instructions, so now he wants us to write it out from scratch.
That's fine. Empty the list. Oh, clear.
Yeah, like clear screen? Or clear something?
Yes, I'm just assuming. If the list is full, output list full. To standard error.
You guys said what I asked. That's good.
We would never disobey.
Are you guys ready? I was just mapping out your lives for the next 3 years. It seemed important.
Did you fit Business 18 somewhere?
Yeah, we put it in like because we're basically making like the map. For,
What about
like,
36 or whatever?
And Business 18 said, whenever you see it in the catalog, take it. Business 18 will be spring 19th.
The one day I don't bring my backpack.
Huh?
The one day I don't bring my backpack. I'm in a fast track class, so like he drops your lowest score, and since it's the final, I don't need to take it. So I have like a free week.
Well, that's nice that you're done, right?
Well, now I have stats on Monday. But at least it's not a full semester of stats. Fukimoto is really, really cool though. So.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, you know him? Yes.
Well, we got hired at the same time.
Do your kids wrestle with his kids?
Does he still live down in Yucatan?
He's a wrestling coach, so it's like.
Does he still live down in Yucatan?
Yeah. I asked him why, and he didn't really have an answer that was like I approved. I was like, yeah, this is terrible.
Why you live down there or why you wrestle?
No, why you live down there? That dude is super sick. Take his math classes.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Coding assignment.
Phoebe was
There's
really
good instructors on campus and there's not so good instructors.
I have never heard one of my clients say they love any of their Chico State professors, but I'll hear clients from Butte be like, oh my God, I love this teacher. Oh my God, I love this teacher. I'm not looking forward to Chico State.
You're checking your grade, right? As it's already on. So.
Yeah.
You guys have a good weekend?
Yeah.
You guys have a weekend?
I worked all weekend.
Like, I go to class all week and I work all weekend. I have no life. You should realize by now if you're in computer science that you have no life. Half of what my meeting was about.
So you don't
You're
have a
gonna
life
hate this semester, and you're gonna hate your life this semester.
Did you find a place for
and you're gonna hate your life this
36?
semester.
What's that, the project?
36 will always be in the spring. Theoretically, every spring or every.
Is that something you can take alongside another one, or do you want its own?
36 like your campus.
It's kind of like a
right
joke.
now in the program map, it is like the only computer science class we take.
It should be, because it's like a lot.
Well, it's only 2 units, but it is like taking, because basically you're taking everything that you learned in all your other classes and like bringing them together. So you need to take like other classes before you can.
Who teaches that?
April teaches that one. But it's also supposed to be a little bit more industry based where you have guest speakers coming and talk about stuff. So it's a good overall thing. Get used to the real world, you know?
Okay. Hopefully I'll
It's funny, sometimes we have to transition you from being like students to actually like going and making money, like jobs. That's what I'm talking.
Do you have any idea if they're going to make the programming cert in AAS? Or is it going to stay a cert?
Oh, no, there's an AS for it. Programming AS. Yeah.
Is there still just a cert, though, as well?
You can take it as a cert, or you can get the GE, take the GE and get the AS. It's not a transfer, it's a career one. But it's still an AS.
Because I'm sidestepping for the programming cert, but April was like, I don't know if this is going to become you might have an AS in this instead of a cert. I don't know.
If you have no GE, then you have an AS.
Okay, cool.
That's kind of how that works. If you're CIS majors, there's a class hidden on our schedule that is a CIS class. CSCI 24, 35. If you're interested in that.
It's between 1 and 100.
Yeah, between 1 and 99.
Yeah.
What is the class?
Systems design. So, if you're thinking about doing CIS, which technically is not a major in the catalog until next semester, you know, that's what you're doing. This is another course that transfers to Chico State, to their CIS degree. You can now do all the undergrad for CIS at Duke.
You're going to have to look at my life plan and see if it's totally ruined because you just had this meeting or not.
It should be. This is like, really the meeting was for new students. Like, as a new student, and a counselor sits down with you, what's expected to be offered this semester. The programming starts all screwed up though, because we don't go by traditional 4-semester thing.
Yeah, I can tell.
It's like it's an every third semester, and I teach most of the classes, which just sucks for you anyway.
Yep.
Also something we already know.
All right. You guys ready? Did I already say that? Something? You want to do these or should I skip them?
What the heck is going on here?
What's the first one? San Jose? Did I do it? That's what I
I don't know. Where were you?
Is it in like Maryland or is it Arizona? That's a lot closer.
Wichita?
Wichita?
Phoenix.
Phoenix.
Tampa.
Tampa.
Tulsa.
Tulsa.
Chicago.
Chicago.
San Diego.
San Diego.
Houston.
Did you just read my slide? Look at this. Let's talk about this.
He's like, fuck you, Denzel. You can die to fire.
Good news. Today's lecture is pretty easy. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take what in your brain's been rolling around of like, I feel like this is how things work. But
Is there something in there?
This is how things work. So today I'll be like, yes, formally, this is how things work. And this should make sense. Today we can talk about scope. Let's say we're going to talk about mouthwash, that's all. Right?
8x scope.
Right? Because computer scientists, they need hygiene a lot of the time. So today's lecture is all about
Okay.
hygiene,
No.
mouthwash.
Don't do this to
Take a
us.
shower every once in a while, please.
And don't just subsist on cheeseburgers and fried chicken.
Exactly.
You gotta put pizza in there.
Unscrewed.
Exactly.
You need to get the spectrum. You need to get the pizza. There's the vegetables.
Lifespan that you'll have, you'll probably make about the same amount of money as others. Your life is
That's fair.
It's a ray of sunshine today.
That's right. One of these things says, right, programmers like take in coffee and eat pizza and make code. I think one of those things.
No, those are the two major food
Yeah,
groups.
program, right? It's not just an organism that turns coffee and pizza into software. Oh, caffeine and pizza, right? Doesn't matter, right? Could be
Coffee's got caffeine in it.
Mountain Dew, Code Red. Or,
Could be Red Bull and Jaeger.
I don't know. I think all that.
Could be fistfuls of Oxycontin.
You guys are laughing because you're like, yeah, this is actually. You have to be a programmer. You have to like smoke. Or
There's no
coffee.
class to teach us how to not survive college and working. So
Right, yeah.
we get out and we're like, wait, what?
There's a life skills class I'll recommend. Yeah, once you're live.
CLS.
I don't know what interest is. What is a mortgage?
My life's still right, all that stuff that I took away.
Basically, like, everything's a lie. There is no cake.
All right. Hey, good news. Normally there's like 50 bullet points, and today how many bullet points are there?
One?
One.
Well, how many are invisible?
None. There's no invisible one. Today's lecture, Thursday we do review, test next Tuesday. Right?
Nice.
Review will get us really set up for the test. Hopefully you can like make classes or do stuff with classes and make objects from classes.
Hopefully.
Write a loop. I think you can do that, right? Right, write a simple function, right? Like last class, we had a function that took in some values and we added them together and returned them. Hopefully you got that down. If you got that down, test is going to be easy. If you don't got that down, test is a little bit harder. That's okay.
Thanks for the inspiration.
Anyone have that moment in this semester that like they want to rethink their life?
When I was trying to figure out that assignment.
Or maybe you didn't do yet, right? You're like, I don't know if this is for me or not.
Torture.
There was one point in there where I was just like multiplying it by 10, and I was like, I don't know if this is cheating or not.
But really, you rethink your life when you take
could just output
Calc 2,
just output
Physics
the answer.
1, 41, and you take like 21 class after this, that semester, I don't expect to have a lot. You'll
I can have a lot.
But eventually you get through to the other side, sometimes. All right, enough of that. Anyone have any questions?
What are you doing?
You've only showed us one bullet point.
It's not very many questions.
Is that what you're telling me? If I just show you one bullet point every slide, you guys will stop asking questions.
Yeah. That'll fix.
All right.
You could try that logic and see if it's
Here's
an
your
error.
bullet point.
150
Any questions on
slides.
this? Function should be self-contained, right? What do I mean by that? Every function, think of it as its own box. The box does stuff. It's self-contained. It does not affect other things in your program. Right? Stuff in a function does not change the values of variables in main. Does that make sense?
Is that like an accessor?
We'll get the accessor, right? But we're just talking about functions in general, whether they're part of classes or not. They're self-contained. They do one thing. They do it well. They don't mess with anything else. Right? Their job is to do one thing. They're like a cog in a wheel, right? They do one thing and they do it well. Right? They shouldn't interfere with other functions or other variables or any of that, right? And these functions, we give them their own variables, right? Which is partly where we're getting confused because functions have parameters, but you can also, they're like main, you can create other variables in them. But then like in main, you have a variable called x, but in this function, you have a variable called x. And in that function, you have a variable called x. And you're like, what's going on? Right?
Have we used this before?
before?
Have we used this yet? And you just didn't say that that's what it's doing?
Well, I think innately what I'll say today will be like, oh yeah, of course that's how it works. Right? So they'll formalize it. So if you haven't had that aha moment, maybe today you'll have that aha moment. Right? Variables that we declare in functions are called local variables because they are local to the function that we declare them in. Basically saying they exist in that function and nowhere else. They exist in that function and nowhere else. Which is why when you tried to like use the meters variable inside of the set distance function, it didn't work. Because there's no meters variable, there was a length variable. Right? These functions are self-contained. They have their own variables. Right? Classes make it a little bit crazy because underscore variables are shared. Right? All functions of the class share the underscore variables. But if you think of just regular non-underscore variables, they exist in a function and only that function. Okay? So let's think about square root. Right? Square root was a function where we passed in a value and it produced the square root of that value. Make sense? Do we know the names of any of the variables in that function? No, it probably had variables, but do we know them? No, right? Because the square root function is self-contained. It doesn't matter because all the variables in that function are self-contained. Imagine, if you will, that the square root function had a variable called x and it wasn't self-contained. That means that x would be related to like an x that you made in main and an x you made somewhere else, right? And that would be a pain in the ass. Agreed?
True.
Right? So functions are self-contained. The variables you create inside of them are local variables. They exist in that function and only that. Right? Functions we define, same rules apply, right? Variables in main are different from variables in function A and function B and function C. Right? You can name them the same thing. We're going to see that today, but they are different variables. Okay, in my examples today, we'll name things the same on purpose so we understand that concept. But you'll see today too that you shouldn't do that because it gets really confusing, right, to name everything the same. So scope is the idea of when you declare a variable, where can you use it? So we say variables have scope. The scope is where you can use the variable. So a variable created in main has a scope of main. A variable created in function foo has a scope of foo, right? Because the variable is self-contained, or the function is self-contained. The variable exists in that function and only that function. Right, so here we go. I have a function called total cost. 2 parameters, right, and another variable called subtotal. But technically, total cost has 3 variables, right? Because parameters are variables, right? Parameters are variables. Right? So num-param scope is what? Total cost, right? Num-param created in my function has a scope of that function, and the name of my function is total cost. Right? Subtotal is what kind of variable?
Local variable.
It's a local variable, right? Which means that you can use it only in the total cost function, right? You only can use it in the total cost function. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? I'm saying this kind of like bringing it all together because if you try to use a variable in a function and it didn't exist in that function, right, you get compiler error. So you kind of run into this problem, right? But now today we're trying to solve it. Right, so the basic kind of scope are variables created in a function and they exist only in that function. Okay? Now we're going to muddy the waters a little bit because we also have this idea of class scope. Right, because in a class you have members, whether they be member functions or member names, right, or attributes and or behaviors. Attributes and behaviors are shared by everything in the class. So we have the idea that those members have class scope. We don't have to redeclare them in our functions because they exist as their own variables in all of the functions. Right? Attributes are shared, right, by all members of the class, which is why we put underscores on the end of them to remind us that they have class scope. Right? Variables without underscores have local scope. Variables with underscores have class scope. So you should never redefine an underscore variable in your function. Don't say int x underscore, right? Because you've already declared int x underscore in the class declaration. Good? Fine. So here's my total cost class, right? Total cost, right, is part of my class, which means that my class could have attributes, right? Could have behaviors that now total cost can access. So total cost has 3 variables, just like before, and it also has access to all behaviors and attributes, right? So all underscore variables and all functions of the class, it now has access to it. Make sense? All right, let's look at it. Well, I don't have it up, so give me a second. I don't have that. So here, I already put all the code in there because I really want to go through what the code does. All right, so let's talk about what this code does. All right. I have a function called dummy. Everyone good with that? Function called dummy? This is a dummy function. Doesn't do anything. All right. Is that dummy function part of a class? No. No, right? Because it's not inside of the class keyword. All right, so line 13, I have this dummy function, right, not part of a class. Line 16, I make a function, or not a function, a class called what? dummy class, which inside of it has a function called dummy class, which is a what? Constructor, right? Because it's named after the name of the class, so it's a constructor, right? Technically a default constructor because it has no parameters, right? And then I have another function called add that takes an integer called 1. But notice it also has an attribute, right, called what? 2. It really should be 2 what? Underscore, right? And I didn't put an underscore on it today to confuse them. Because I have to get some enjoyment out of my job.
Oh, okay.
Really just to show you that the variable 2 can show up lots of places, and where it shows up defines what it is and where you can use it. So everyone's good with the fact that my program starts in where? Main, right? Is main a function?
Yes.
Yes, which means all variables created in main have a scope of?
Main.
Main, they're local variables. So here we're going to have main, right? So I'm going to break up today, I'm going to break up all my variables into their scopes, right? Because you can only use them in their scope. In main line 30, I create a double called what?
1.
1, and I give it the value of?
1.
1. Right, it is a double. Are we good with that?
Yeah.
Right, and then on line 31, I create another variable called
2.
2, which is an integer, right, and its value is?
2.
2. Soon I'll put values that aren't 1 and 2 in the variables, and then I'll row them. Now on line 33, I see out local 1 plus local 2. I say 1 plus 2. I'm in main, everyone agree? So the variables I use are the variables in main. Do I have a variable named 1 in main? Yes, that's 1.0. Variable named 2. 2. 1 plus 2 is?
3.0.
3, right? And so my first output I'm expected to be what? 3.0 or probably just 3. All right, local 1 plus local 2 is 3. Good so far? Nothing crazy, right? Now, line 35, right? We're going to leave main. Everyone agree?
Yeah.
It's a function call. I'm going to call the function called dummy. I'm going to leave main. And what am I going to take with me? 2, right? But not really the variable 2, but the value inside the variable of 2, which happens to also be what? 2. So 2 is going to come with me. So when I go to the dummy function, right? What I'm taking with me is what? 2. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the value that I'm going to bring with me. I'm going to go to the dummy function and bring 2 with me. Which means I'm going to leave main scope. And whose scope am I going to be in now? Dummy scope. All right, so let's look at the dummy function. Now, in the dummy function, I have one parameter. Its name is what? 1. It is of what type?
Int.
Int. Whereas in main, I had a variable called 1 that was a what?
Double.
Double. They are different variables because they are in their own scope, right? They're local to their function. Good?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so in that function, what is the value of the variable 1?
2. 2, right?
2, right? Because when I called the dummy function, what value did I pass in?
2.
2. 2 gets placed into the first parameter, which name is 1, so 1's value is?
2.
Right? Just to be me. Okay, now you'll notice on line 47, I create another integer variable called what?
2.
2.
2, and give it the value of?
5.
5. It's an int, right? Yeah. Okay, please note, 2 variables named 1 and 2. 2 variables named 1 and 2. Is that possible? Yes, because they're each in their own scope. So they are, each function is self-contained, right? These variables are contained in main. These variables are contained in dummy. So when I see out dummy 1 plus dummy 2, and I say 1 plus 2, whose 1 plus 2 am I using?
The one in the dummy function?
Right, the one in the function, right? So 2 plus 5 is?
7.
7, right? So the next
Some
time
high
I
level
get out,
math here.
I'm going to hopefully see a 7. I'm assuming that I do. When a function ends, what happens?
Goes back to main, maybe?
I go back to main or wherever the function call was, right? I always go back to the function call. So I leave dummy, right? And because the function call was in main, right? I'm going to go back to main, right? I've now called that function, right? And today, what else I get to do is that, am I in dummy scope anymore?
Nope.
No, right? Whose scope am I in?
Main?
Main. And so what happens is this goes away, right? Dummy scope is gone, so all the variables created in dummy are gone. Now, if I call dummy again, I would get new variables with the same name with new values, right? But the function's over, it's gone, I can't get back to it. We're good. Line 37. In main, I create an object of type what? Dummy class, right? So I get this object called object, right? Whose type is dummy class, right? And if we remember correctly, in dummy class we had one attribute whose name was, do you remember? 2. All right, so I had one attribute whose name was 2. I probably should have at least named it 2 underscore. But you'll notice that 2 is wrapped up in object. This 2 is not wrapped up in an object. Make sense? One I access by doing object.to, and one I just say 2. Now, all right, here's your first test. What happens when you create an object? Something gets called, right? What gets called? The constructor, right? And so really, even though there's no parentheses, that is a function call. It says go to the constructor, in this case, the default constructor, and construct my object. Right? Which means I leave main, and I go to the dummy class constructor. Agreed?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so here's my dummy class constructor, which means that I'm in a different scope. Does that make sense? I leave main, I'm in a different function with different scope. Now, in this function, I say 2 gets assigned what?
10.
10. Now, do I have a variable named 2 in this function? In
No.
the function?
No.
No, right? Not yet, right? I don't have a variable there, right? If I had a variable there, it would be a local variable, and this would assign the value 10 to that variable, okay? But if no local variable exists, C++ then goes to what kind of scope? Not local, but or global. No, not main. I can't jump to main.
Parameter.
Well, my constructor is part of a what?
Class.
A class. So it goes to class scope, right? If your function is part of a class and the variable does not exist as a local variable, it will look for a class scoped variable. Right? So it says, is there a variable named 2 in my dummy class? And the answer is yes. And because I called it on object, right? Technically, this was object.dummy class. Does that make sense? Right? Which means that when I access the attributes, I'm accessing the attributes of object. So 2's attribute gets the value of 10. Function is what happens?
Goes back to where you called
Goes
it.
back to where you called this, goes away. Right? And so now I go back up. There we go. The mouse will show up eventually. I go back up to here, and the next line says what? Object.add 2, right? So I say object.add, and in the parentheses, I pass in the value that the variable 2 holds, right? Am I in main? Yes. And so I'm looking for a variable named what?
2.
Do I have one?
Yep.
Its value is?
2.
2. So I'm going to an add function that is part of dummy class, and I'm passing in the value of
2.
So let's go down to that. All right, there's my add function. Does it have a parameter?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is good because it might pass it in an argument.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the parameter's name is
1.
1. So type int, right? And it gets the value that was
2.
passed in, right? So 2. Great. Great. Okay. Now I say cout dummy class add 1 plus dummy class add 2, and I say 1 plus 2. All right. So the value of 1 would be the value of a local variable in my function if it exists. Is there a variable called 1 in my function?
Yes.
Yes. Its value is
2.
2. So it's going to be 2 plus the value of the variable 2 if it exists in my function. Does it exist in my function?
Nope.
Not that one.
Not that one, right? There is no TWO variable in this function. So if it doesn't exist locally, the next place it looks is
Class.
class, if it's part of a class, right? Which it is. Is there a 2 attribute in my class?
Yes.
Yes, and its value is 10. And 2 plus 10 is
12.
12. All right. Now the function ends, and so what happens? Two things happen. Back to the call, and
Erase that.
right, scope goes away. Right, because I'm no longer in that scope. Whose scope am I in again?
Main.
Main. No, I probably should have done that. Right, all this was part of main. I just ran out of room. So I go back. Right to here. Right, and the next line of code says to do what?
Return 0.
Return 0, which means program over, right? So what happens to all my variables in main?
To reset.
They'll just reset, they're gone, right? Memory has been given back to the computer, right? Program never existed. All right, we're good to go. If I run this, hopefully, right, I get those values. Okay. Did I get 3? Yeah. Did I get 7? Did I get 12? Questions? Variables created in a function exist only in that function. You could have 10 functions, all with a variable named x. Is that okay? Yes, because every function has its own variables, right? So you can have x in any place that you want.
But why do you always get the error message that it's not defined in the scope?
Right, yeah, right? It says variable is not declared what? In this scope, right? And now you know what scope is, right? So you always understood the first part of it, variable not declared. So now you know in this scope. Because it might exist in a different function. You're like, but it's there, right? I saw it. I saw the variable, but you didn't declare it in this scope. Right? The scope is.
Is it still considered bad practice to have those names all the same all throughout?
Well, it'd be bad practice for them all to be named X. But if the name made sense for the function, then not necessarily.
Okay.
Right? And so like even in classes, right? In our mutators, we always name it after the name of the attribute, but like in the constructor, a lot of times we name it after the name of the attribute. So like in assignment 3B, right? You had like double meters show up like 5 places. A couple places. Right? But that made sense because the value coming in was what? Meters.
Right.
Right? You had length show up a couple places, you had unit show up 4 places, right? Unit, care unit showed up 4 places. How many variables was it though? 4 distinct variables, right? Each unit was its own distinct variable in each function, right? But they all kind of had the same conceptual idea of what they were, right? They had stored a character that was in it.
One of them blew me up. I was like, what the heck? It was because it was like meters to whatever and then whatever to meters.
Right.
It was like the
One was going one way coming in, one was one way going
why am I getting like 10,000 more value for
So
this?
basically you're saying that if you declare any variables in the function, you can only call the function, you can't use those variables just in main or anywhere else.
You declare them in main, you can use them in main. You declare them in a function, you can only use them in that. So this int1, and parameters are declarations. I think sometimes that throws people off. Yeah. Parameters are declarations. Anyone ever do that? Do you say like int1 in here, it says something about variable declaration shadows of parameters, right? Which kind of sounds cool, but really it's just saying this is a variable, so don't recreate the variable. So we have that and we have that. Make sense a little bit? Right, you want to add on a little bit more to it? So we have 2 kinds of scopes right now, local scope and class scope. And I heard some people say, what other kind of scope? Global. So let's talk about what global scope is, right? And then why you should never use global.
That's good transition.
Sound good? Right. So we're going to talk about global scope. Global scope is great for constants, right? Remember, constants are variables that what?
Show up lots of times.
Show up lots of
And
times,
don't want
right?
them to change.
And they don't change, right? And we use the keyword
Const.
const, right? C-O-N-S-T. Right, so I can do this. Const double tax rate equals 0.05, which sounds like a pretty good tax rate. Right?
Let's go there.
We'd take that.
Take me there.
I don't care if it was what kind of taxes that was. I think I would take that tax. Let's see. So that's great, right? Basically, we're using this number, right? Lots of places, right? Tax rate should be the same. But it could be that I could write 10 different functions and they all need to use the same tax rate. But we just learned that variables created in a function will exist in where? That function,
That
right?
scope.
So if I create a constant in a function, it only exists in that function. But if I'm using tax rate intent function, somehow I'd like to share that value between all the functions. That makes sense? Right, that's where the idea of global scope and global constants come in. Right? So what we can do is we can create a variable globally so all functions can use it.
So if you create a bunch of functions, and you declare the function variables, but you include all those functions in the class, even if they all have distinct variables, would you be able to call various variables from different functions through the function because they're all different?
No, only attributes. So even class functions don't share their variables that you create in that function, but they share all your underscores. And so global variables, we think of their scope being the scope of the entire program, meaning everything in the program can use them. And you've probably created some of these by accident, and maybe I told you not to do that, and maybe I haven't caught it yet, but don't create global stuff, right? But constants are fine. So we declare the constants after our includes, after our using statement. So include IO string, using an stdc out, and then const double k pi equals 3.14. Similar. Does that make sense? Right? Meaning all your functions can now use pi. Right? So that's what my example's doing. Right? So imagine that I had, right, an area function and a volume function, which both use pi to calculate the area and volume of various circular things. Right? And so after my using statements, I would say const double k pi equals 3.1415. However far that I want to go. Right? This constant, because it was declared outside of main, can be used in every function of my program. Every function can access the value k pi. Can they change it?
Nope.
Because it's a
constant.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
And that's why global constants are okay, because you can access them, right? Share a value, but you can't change the value. Okay? You technically can create global variables, meaning that you can create a variable that you could access in all functions and change in all functions, but they make your program really messy, because as your program gets bigger, imagine, function G changes that variable, and then function Z also changes that variable. Right? And as you're debugging, you're like, wait, why is it that value? Which function got called to change that value? Right? We don't like to share a variable with my whole program. Right? The most sharing we do is in classes, right? Class attributes are shared with just the class function, which makes sense because the class is self-contained. We don't want to create one variable that all functions can use. Right? Imagine if you made X global, right? That might affect so many different things. Right? So we always like to have our functions be self-contained, have our variables be contained in those. All right, ready to look at that example? I guess so. You guys know this.
O'Doyle rules.
So after my includes, after my using statements, I say const double k pi equals 3.14159. This constant is in global scope. Okay? And remember, it was created outside of a function, which means it can be used in all functions of your program. And so in my circle class, right, I have a function for area, I have a function for circumference. You'll notice in main, right, I create some objects, but even before I create the objects, everyone see that I output what?
Pi.
K pi, right? Now the order is you will always look for a local variable first. And you always look up or down?
Down. Wait, local, up?
When you use a variable, you always look which way, up or down for the declaration?
Up.
Up, right? Because we always declare our variables before we use them. And so on line 38, it's going to go look up to main, right, and say, is there a variable called k pi? And the answer is?
Yes, there is.
No.
Oh, wait,
In main.
In main.
No variable created in main, okay? Now, if there's no variable in main, the next place it'll look is class scope if your function is part of a class. And is main part of a class? No. So the last gas place that it can look before it says, right, variable not declared is what?
Above.
Global scope. So it looks outside and up, and does it see a variable called k pi? Yes, right? If I go up, once again, if I scroll up here, right, it sees a variable called kpi, right? A global variable, right? So it will output the value of the global variable. Does that make sense? Cool. So it should output 3.14159, right? And then I'm going to call these functions, which means that it will jump down to those functions. And notice in the area function, it will return kpi times tau of radius underscore squared. Right? Once again, it will look in the area function for a variable called kpi. Does it exist? No. So then it will look at what scope? Before that, class scope, right? So it looked in local, didn't find it. It looks in class scope. Was kpi part of the class? Was an attribute? No. And so the only place it can look now is global scope. Right? Now, radius underscore. Right, once again, it will always look local first. Is there a variable called radius underscore in the area function? No. So then it looks in class scope. And is there a variable called radius underscore in the class? Mm-hmm. Yes. And so that's the variable that you're accessing. Right, if it didn't exist, then it would look in global. And if it didn't exist there, it would say not declared, right? In this. Make sense? Questions there? Global's not too hard. Create a variable outside of everything and everything can touch it. Right? Should you make variables in global scope though? No, only constants. Constants great, variables not so great. Ready for the last little bit? We can handle it? All right, we're gonna get out normal time as always, even though I didn't show up. Let's talk about a little bit more scope. Everyone good that blocks of codes are things inside of curly braces? Right? Yeah. Blocks of codes are things inside of curly braces. And so what happens is that all curly brace things actually have their own scope. It's called block scope. Right? Which should make sense because we create variables and functions. And functions start with a open curly brace and then a closing curly brace, which means that their scope is that block of code, which is the entire function. Make sense? Right? And in C++, if you create variables inside of blocks of code, they have a scope of that block of code. And if you think hard, you'll realize that we actually put blocks of code inside of blocks of code inside of blocks of code. Because imagine if I had a function, curly brace, right? Inside that I have a loop, which also has what? Curly brace, and inside that I had an if statement or a switch, which is also curly brace, right? So we have curly braces inside of curly braces inside of curly braces. And all of those curly brace blocks have their own scope. Does that make sense? They have their own scope. And the way that scope works is that inside inner blocks can look to the outside, but outside blocks cannot look to the inside. So inner blocks can look out for variables, but outside blocks cannot look inside of inner blocks for those variables, which is what these were discussed as. Right, so let's look at this. I kind of took off like, doesn't matter if it's a function, it doesn't matter if it's an if statement or a loop, right? Just imagine that you had a block of code with another block of code, right? This variable called number exists in the outer block. That makes sense? Right, whereas another variable named what? Number exists in the inside block. Will this compile? Yes, because each block of code has its own scope. All right. So let's see what happens here, right? Are we going by locations? Imagine that each location is like a cout statement, cout number. So at location A, if I cout number, what am I going to get?
Probably garbage.
Okay.
Unless you initialize.
Not garbage. Right? Variables undeclared, right? Because we have to declare our boxes before we use them, right? So at location A, have I created a variable called number yet? No, and so I get number was not declared in this scope. Now, do I declare a number in the scope? Yes. Yes, and so when I cout number, what variable value do I output? 1.
So you're saying the location is what's above, or it's location?
Yeah, where it says location would be the code right before that. So in location C, right, I've now entered an inner block, right, inside of a loop, inside an if statement. If I cout number, what do I get? 1. Get 1, right? Because which way can I look? Only up and to the outside. Into the outside. So I look up into the outside, and is there a variable called number? Yes, and its value is 1. But now on the inner block, I create a number called what? 2, right? Value 2. So when I see out number at location D, still inside the inner block, what value do I output? 2, right? 2. Now, I leave that scope, I output number at location E. What value do I output? 1 or 2, right? And everyone mostly said what? 1. Because an outside block cannot look to the what? Inside block. So it's like all this code doesn't exist. So it looks up here and it keeps going up. It doesn't find a variable called number. Yes, and its value is 1. Does that make sense a little bit? Right? That being said, the recommendation always has been and continues to be that you create your variables at the top of your function. Right? Whatever boxes you need for your function, you create them at the top, not when you need them inside of a loop or inside of an if statement or what have you.
Unless it's like a loop for I.
Unless it's a loop for I, which is what we're going to talk about now. Good segue.
I'm not looking at that.
Right? So when I declare a variable in a for loop, which I do all the time because normally I say like anti equals 0, the scope of that variable is the for loop, is the body, the curly braces of the for loop. Okay? So I, as a variable, only exists in this for loop because I said what? Anti. Right? It only exists in that for loop. That's what some of our lab questions are on, but we'll look at some sample code.
Even though you're not declaring the variable inside of brackets.
Right. It's not outside of the curly braces, but it is part of the for loop, so it's treated. For loops are special, which is why we're talking about it. Right? So the scope of that I is the for loop and only the for loop.
You can do the cool stuff with for loops.
You do lots of cool stuff.
Exactly. That's what I just said. You are just concurring.
So let's look at this for loop. I guess we can keep our classes here. Okay. I gets declared in my for loop, so it only exists where?
In
my for loop. All right, quick test. If I starts at 1 and I go less than 5, how many times do I loop?
4.
4 times, right? It's always 1 less than or equal to the number, or 0 less than the number, right? Don't do 1 less than the number. You always go 1 less.
1 less than size.
Right, exactly. So if I run that, does it work? Right, there's my values, agreed? Now, what value does I have to be when the loop ends?
Has to be 5.
Has to be 5. In order for the loop to end, the value has to be 5. So I could be like, great, let me look at, right? I want to see that 5, right? So after the for loop, I'm going to say see out, I, and then a new one. And I compile, and what do I get?
An error.
An error. What does it say? I was
Not declared in the
not
scope.
declared in this scope. Right? Because I was declared in the
For loop.
for loop and not in outside the for loop. So it only exists in the for loop. I tried to access it outside the for loop, so I get what? Not declared.
You could put it in the for loop and get it, see out each iteration.
I could, which I'm already kind of doing,
You're
right?
kind of doing
so
that
if I
right
wanted this, I would have to create I outside of it and then not recreate it inside of it. So int I in the for loop, that I, which is now outside of the scope, right, is shared. And when I do that, then I get, right, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Does that get messy though when you're using multiple for loops?
Yeah,
When you do it
for loops are
outside like that?
self-contained. It's very rare that you need to use I outside of the for loop. Because remember, I is your iterator for your for loop. So you don't really need it outside. So it's good to say int I in all your for loops, which is why also, right, and you guys have been doing this, you're probably not realizing it, right? There's one for loop, but then you guys, like later on, we're writing another for loop that's an int I again, right? You're not, those two I's are not the same I's, right? One I exists in one of the for loops, and one I exists what? In the other for loop.
So when you're declaring it outside of the loop, would that mess up things like if you were trying to access a spot in an array and you're using I to access that, would that make, that's when it would get messy, right?
As long as you're not redeclaring them in the for loop. Okay, this code compiles, Right? How many I's did I create in my code?
3.
3, right? 2 of them are self-contained, they exist in the for loop, and 1 of them is used for everywhere else in the function. But when I changes, it's affecting this I, not the outside one, right? And when this I changes, it affects this I and not the outside one. So they are kind of self-contained. So you're not too worried about cross-contamination.
Because that could get really messy. Especially when it's looping, so it's like,
Right.
wrong.
What's going on? Okay. Did you guys read the assignment? Kind of.
I remember when April taught us that on
Something.
Khan Academy, we broke it.
She taught you what?
When we were doing for loops on Khan Academy, it like broke.
Oh yeah, it didn't work after that.
Too many.
He's like, learn this now because you're going to go home and your computer's going to freeze and you're not going to be able to turn it in on time.
All right. So code assignment 4 mirrors or melds classes with arrays. Right? Arrays contain values that are all of the same type, and classes contain behaviors and attributes that only act on something. Everyone good with that so far? Right, and so in this assignment, which you have 3 weeks to do, right, so it's going to span over the test and continue on. But the nice thing is you have everything you need to do it now. I will not be teaching you anything in the next 3 weeks that will, give you anything else than what you already need to know. I mean, we might solidify some stuff, but you have everything you need to know to do code assignment 4 right now. Okay? That makes sense? Everyone good with that? So in this lab, you're going to implement a class to store a list of doubles. Right? So the idea of all the class objects are to store double values. Right? If I want to store a lot of double values, what am I probably going to create? An array. Good. Right? And it says that right there. This class will internally store the list as an array. Okay, so internally, right, the attribute of your class is an array of type double because it stores, double values. Right? And this class will allow you to add doubles to the list. It will allow you to get a double out of the list. It will allow you to output all the doubles in the list as comma separated, which we've done. Right? It'll let you get the size of the list, get the sum, mean, average, and largest value of the list, and it'll allow you to empty the list. Okay? You'll notice that in all those bullet points, did I say array or did I say list?
You said list.
Said list, right? Because we're talking about a class called list, right? So we have this logical idea of a list. Internally, we're going to store those values of the list in a what? Array. Okay? But you have to think about the fact that in this assignment, you have this logical idea of a list, and then you have the physical idea of an array. Okay, so let's just imagine that, I have some array, let's just call it list underscore, and what is it going to hold?
Doubles.
Doubles. Okay, it's an array, not a what? List. Okay, so you're going to hold values, and you're also going to have a size telling you how many values are in your list. Okay, not how many values are in the array, or how big the array is, but how many values are in the list. Okay, how many values are in my list right now?
0.
There are 0 values in my list. What's the maximum capacity of my list? 5, right? The size of the array is the maximum capacity of the list. Okay. If you think about binder paper, Binder paper looks like this. Everyone good with that? Right? Binder paper has a maximum capacity of how many lines you can write on the piece of paper. Right? But a blank piece of binder paper, doesn't have any lines written on it yet. Does that make sense? And so in the same way, your list starts out empty. None of the lines have anything on them. And as you add doubles to the list, you slowly take up the lines until you have no more lines to take up. Does that make sense? Everyone kind of seeing the difference between your array and your list? So, if you imagine, if I add 3 values, then the size of my list is going to be what? Right? The size of my list is going to be 3. Does that make sense? Okay. In your last coding assignment, I wrote the interface file for you, and you had to write the implementation, right? Copy the functions from the H, paste them into the CPP, and then modify. I'm going to do that. In this assignment, I tell you what the interface looks like, but it's your goal to write both the interface file and the implementation file, the H and the CPP. So let's look at how we kind of would do that, right? I'm going to skip over the constructor, but let's look at this function, right? The function name is what?
Insert.
Insert. So in my H file under the public section, I would just write insert, because the function name is what? Insert. Functions always start with an opening paren, so I would do that. Now you'll notice that the insert function, that's its name, does it have a parameter?
Yes.
Right, of type what?
Double.
Double, which means the next word after the paren would be what?
Double.
Double. Now, what do I name it? Well, that depends on what the double's for. The double is to do what? To add or insert an item to the list. Does that make sense? So, double what? Add, or probably even better,
Insert.
like item to add. Like that's so verbose, right? Right? Really, that's what we're doing, right? It's the item or the value, right? It's the double value that we want to add to our list. Next thing says function return. The function returns what? Nothing, which means that the function has what return type?
0 or void.
Void.
Okay.
Right? It doesn't return anything, it's void, right? And so the first thing that you're going to do in this assignment is to read all the functions and write what the prototype looks like. Function name, parameters go here. If it says parameters none, it's just open paren and what? Close paren. Return type, if it says none, is void. If it says it returns a double, then you say double, right? If it says it returns an int, you say. That makes sense? So that's step 1. That helps set up your H file. Once you have your interface, then you can copy that and paste them in your implementation. Right? So the last thing, the function description, right? That's what you write in the implementation, right? The description says what it's supposed to do. Right? And let's look at this. It says for the add or the insert function, it adds an item to the what? End of the list. Does it say end of array or does it say end of list? Okay? The end of the array is always the last spot. Right? Where's the end of my list right now? This is the last thing in there, agreed? So the next spot is here. Right? Now 3.2 is at index
0.
Index
1, 2, 3, 4.
Right? So the next thing to insert is at index what?
3.
3. How do I know? Like it's going to change, right? When I add something, then the next thing to insert will be at index what?
4.
4. Right? How do I know where that is? Is there another 3 on the board right now?
No, there's size 3.
Size is 3, right? So let's just think about this. If I add a value here, right, 0.1, at location 3, what happens to size?
It increases.
And where's the next spot that I want to insert at? Index 4. So there is a correlation between the size of your list and the next available spot to insert into your array. Does that make sense? So your array at location square bracket, right, at location size is actually the next spot to insert, right? So long as there is room, okay? And there's not room when size equals capacity, right? How big is my array? 5. So when I add another value in here, right, size becomes what? 5. So if size equals capacity of my array, right, size of my array, then it's full, agreed? And so in this, we don't do anything. We give an error message. I'll put this. Does that make sense a little bit? All right, and then there's a bunch more functions. Yay!
Oh my god.
I gave you 3 weeks because I expected to take what?
3 weeks?
3 weeks. So I would start on it now.
When I did the get full origin master thing, class master, wait, is it class master?
Yeah, class
Trying to get that one? Okay.
If you want new files, it's always get full class master If you get a weird like thing that pops up, it's always control plus X. This thing called nano pops up, control X. If something else weird happens, then you come down. All right, let's see if I hit all the notes. The class stores a list of up to 10 values of type double. So your array is going to be of size 10, right? List capacity is going to be of capacity of 10. So you got to talk about this a lot, right? The array is of size 10, but the list can have up to 10 items, right? So the list is not always full, right? The list starts out at size what? 0. List starts out at size 0. Capacity is 10. So I can add 10 values before size equals capacity. Management tracking variable, aka what? Right? So one of the attributes of your class will be a variable that holds the size. Right? Int size, int current size, int size of list underscore, right? Whatever you want to call it. List and array are not the same thing. We talked about that, right? List is that logical abstract concept, right? The array is the physical place where we're storing it, right? To represent an empty list, for example, set your tracking variable to 0, right? Which is what your constructor says to do. It says set, right, your tracking variable, the size of the list to 0. Okay. Questions there? All right, let's talk about one more thing and then we'll be done. Or then I'll talk about the lab. All right, let's talk about this last function. Function 8. Public member function 8 called clear. No parameter, so it's just open close paren. Return type is none, so it's void, right? Void, clear, open close paren, semicolon. All right, what does it do? It resets the list to empty, i.e. clears the list. Okay, everyone good that my list is full right now?
Mm-hmm.
All right, how would I clear the list? Anyone have any ideas?
It's probably like a clear function.
So
What would that do? Right, you're writing a clear function.
Well, I remember
make
you.
a for loop to set them all to 0.
Okay, so you can make a for loop and set them all to 0. Right, gets rid of all the values. Is that all I would have to do?
You'd have to restore.
You have to reset the tracking variable, right?
What?
You have to reset the tracking variable.
Reset the tracking variable to what?
0.
Right? So let's talk about this. If I set size back to 0, right? And now I could loop and make those all 0, agreed? But really they started out as garbage, right? And did that affect my program?
No.
No, because the next time I insert, I'll insert at location what?
0.
0, which will overwrite the 3.2 with what?
Whatever you're right.
Right, some value. And size will be what?
1.
1, right? Because, I wish I had another color. Do I have another color? Let's find out.
Black.
Not another color. Oh well.
Slightly darker.
We have this idea that really size, right, is like the wall of your list, right? Right now, the list is only what? 2, right? There's one thing in it, right? The size is 1, the only value is 2. These are all garbage values, right? Because I don't care about them. All my loops aren't going to loop to the end of the array. They always loop to the end of the size, right? The end of the list, right? So clear is actually really easy. You just say size underscore equals 0, and that's it. That's all I have to do because, right? Basically, you're marking all the values as garbage, and as you insert new values, they will overwrite all your garbage values with new values. Remember, in all your loops, you're going to loop a lot. In all your loops, you don't loop to capacity, right? You loop to size of the list, right? Which sometimes size of the list is 0, and it tells you just like see out or see error, an error message, right? Otherwise, if there's one value, guess what? The sum of the list is just that one value. Does that make sense a little bit? Right? Once you get your fingers dirty a little bit, right, in the code, then you'll have other questions.
So you never want to make an array that's bigger than what you're going to fill it with, because then it's going to have a bunch of garbage values,
Right.
basically.
Yeah. And it would be nice for the user to say how big they wanted their list to be, but we're not there. We can do that after the test. Which is today's lab is 6 questions. All of them are what do they output, meaning I'm expecting you to be the compiler, right? And then you can actually test all your answers. So you should get 100% on this lab because you can check all your answers and make sure that. Okay. Of the 6, number 3 is the craziest. Right. Number 3 has global scope, it has class scope, it has local scope. All right. I will talk about it in probably like, I don't know, half an hour. When you've kind of gone through it a little bit, I will talk about it. But the one thing I want to tell you before that is that you'll notice that the very last thing in my class function is I output this arrow word. Everyone see that?
Yeah.
Have we talked about this arrow ever? No, we haven't. Okay. The order that all functions look at their scope or their variables is they look at local scope and then what? Class scope and then global scope. So if you create a variable that is local, that is the same name as your attribute, right? Your underscore variable. If you create a local variable with the same name, right? You can't access your attribute because you will always look in local scope first. That makes sense? And so what we have is a way to always get us to class scope. And the way to always get to class scope is to say this arrow and then the name of the thing. So this arrow word is the attribute of my class. It'll still go there. Yeah. It says always, instead of looking at local scope, it will always look at global scope, and if it doesn't exist, you'll get it. So this is a way to access global scope, supersede the local scope. That'll help you get through that one. But I will go over that one a little bit too, because you might want it. And then 4, 5, and 6 are all for loops. Right? Please note where I say int I and where I don't say int I. Right? So like here, 6, I say int I here, but I don't say int I. So just pay attention to that. Right? You can, right? Your goal is to go through them as the compiler yourself, and then to throw them in the compiler and your hands. That's what you have for your lab today, lab 16, no, lab 17. Right, this is your last lab before the test, right? So get the lab done, get started on your coding assignment. Right, we'll have review on Thursday and a test the following Tuesday. What you got?
What you got?
All right. No science sheet today. I'll know at the test who's still in class and not on the test.
Okay.
Which coding assignment?
4? Yeah. First assignment 3B was due last Thursday. Please note, if you didn't get done, you get 1 late pass, right? That allows you to turn the code assignment 2 weeks late. You don't lose any points, but you only get 1, right? Oh crap, I didn't get it done.
You can say the last one's like a game.
The last one's an adventure game. It's pretty open. So these last 2 ones, it's like, you must write this function, name this, that takes this. And the last one's like, maybe. I have some parameters of what that's supposed
What
to be.
kind of adventure game are you going to make?
If you let out your creativity with all...
I'm going to make one that's like, you're in it, you walk in, it's like...
What it's going to set up right now is that we'll actually take our
crawl, that's what I'll call it.
that Thursday before finals week. And then for the final, you'll come in with your completed game, and we'll just play and hang out. And you'll get points for that.
Compiler error.
Yeah, but it's not, we will do a final test, which is mostly your final, like, it's all test. Right, so you'll take your final a little earlier, and then. No, I don't like.
Oh,
Not quite.
well, you're not as cool as Fukimoto now.
Right. Still have to take it. I don't drop that. You need to, right? You need to know this before you move on to somewhere.
I guess with our major, it's different. Like, well, I guess if you're doing computer science or CSCI.
How different is this from MATLAB?
Quite a bit different. MATLAB has like, you could do some programming in MATLAB, right? But it's its own language. It's made specifically to do math.
Yeah, because we use C, they all use MATLAB, and to keep that after this, and like, how relevant is this?
I think MATLAB will see the easy. Because basically in MATLAB, you're just going to learn the interface. So it'll be like, this is how you create a variable. This is
These are the
functions you can call to do stuff, and you'd be like, oh yeah.
I can,
That's object oriented, right? So you have your
No, I don't think it's object oriented.
still object oriented.
the class is just create some variables, write some logic, write some things. Which you can do. Good? Great. Okay, I'm coming up. What you got, Kyle? Yes. So this arrow says go to class builder. So you're going to use the word variable that is the attribute of the class, as opposed to what word. Not a pointer. It would be whatever the value of this attribute word is. That's what I'm going to go over that one a little bit. I think I'm just looking at it. Yeah.
Did you get?
So when I was.
Are you talking about?
5 for both of them on one?
Hold on, I'm testing it. I can't even
I don't
compile
want to
it.
do that yet. I want to look at it in my head.
I think that first one was an error because it's not defined variables.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I didn't even look at that. You're right. There's no int.
Yeah.
The only way to get new stuff is always.
Well, I think it is. I think it is because it's using output. And my var is named int my var equals 10 earlier.
Yeah, A wouldn't work because it's not initialized. My var is not it's not initialized.
Because like when you get the error message, it even says
It says it's not defined.
It's not defined in that
Okay.
scope, which is why I asked the question earlier.
B would work.
That makes sense.
And I think B, there's only like one thing that's changed, and it's that the variable is
Yeah, indeed.
So if you commit it, you go back and forth. So there's git log. You do that. So as long as you get add and get committed, you won't run into that problem. In Cloud9, they also have. I don't know how well it works. I can hold it. You can go up to. Okay, so it's going to be one. That one. And so show file. And this will give you like it's almost like a Git timeline where as you go backwards, it's like every time you try this. So it's slowly going to beat up everything forward.
That's exactly what
So it's 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Let me look at the brackets.
Because this one's gonna outside of that scope, it's back to 2.
Yes,
and
you're
then
right.
outside of that scope, it's back to 1.
Yes.
So it's 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 2. Yeah.
It's a long piece of code right there.
So funny.
No, there is no.
I was on fire this morning. I was like fresh brain. Yeah, he's pretty good. Yeah, that's nice.
Here you said meters equals.
Yeah, you and I were always like together. You would just go start a fight. I was like, bro, why? Yeah. Like if you could push them while we were getting, because those guys were focusing just on us. Dude, he could have went wow. Freest win ever.
So your first if statement should just be.
Because if they saw him when they sent their rockets out, they probably weren't. They were probably just straight with him. But if they even saw him, all he could do was build the word res.
You had that in the other one because you had meters coming in. Well, unit is what's coming in from the user. The unit is telling you what they want you to give them. Oh, nothing there, right? If unit equals b, that's saying if what they want is the value in meters, well, what variable holds the meters? Meters underscore, right? And this get distance function returns a what? Right? So how do we return values? What do we say? What's the word we use? Right now is return.
Okay, so this is good.
Return, right? And what we're returning is what? Meters. That makes sense? They're saying that they want to get the distance in meters, so we're going to return meters. Underscore. Now, if they say the unit is K, they want the value not in meters, but in what? Kilometers. So you're going to return meters underscore converted to what? Yeah. Not equals. You're not setting, right? Meters underscore equals says you're setting the meters underscore variable to a different value. You're not setting the value, you're returning the value. So all your yeah, but then you would say return meters underscore divided by 1,000. So replace the meters underscore equals with return, and then add the underscore. And let's see what happens. However you want to do it, it would just, they're all right. That's the pattern that you're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
I think I need a first like start.
Okay, so the first output is
Here, so I feel like I have to 5 times.
the first one is global. String
So like
word
form.
equals
Yeah.
name.
Like in the book says, I have more than one checkbox. More than one checkbox. Than if I did.
Yeah, I did. So the name, so that's where value comes in. So you would have like 8 checkboxes. That's name equals favorite.
Okay, so if we start a value then, value is bot. What is bot?
Bot is just the value that gets into the
I
server.
know, but it's the word bot.
Just
literally the word bot.
It would say, because the name of the form field is bot, right? If you think about it, they always go up in the top, right? So we question mark, and then it would say bot equals bot. And, right, number equals whatever the type there. And item name equals whatever the type.
You mean like the instructor?
No.
I'm gonna redo all this because I'm just lost. Hold on. Try that again.
So,
For the last one, it'll just output what my was like at the end, right? I fixed it up in the screen here, where it's just so I'm just have one side, and it's not going to
hasn't been correct.
and then so it starts out I 0, and then return.
So whatever you type in here
But then when you see my
is basically what the value is.
So I originally tested this.
So if I said value,
So I feel like what's happening is it's like continuing it, basically. That's the only way I can see it.
so value equals is whatever the user.
But sometimes.
Yeah, and it's like the only way I can see it is that because
What exactly is happening when it says object.word? Is it reassigning the...
Value is just what it's saying. So when I hit submit,
Yeah, you wouldn't want to
outputting
put
as
value.
if like all the
but you could override it, right? So if I said 1, 2, 3.
Oh my god. I'm discovering things as I'm going through this.
So what is that? Type in.
Yeah, the one that I don't know. You'll notice that it's submitted to this thing, right? And it received the
I just have a question for you there, Chris. Go back to the instructions real quick.
Hold on, man. What do you need?
Go back to the instructions that
value that we
you had open. Now, what is the value of word?
It's originally right here.
Oh, that's a string. Oh. Oh, okay, I got it. It says it's a string. It's an issue. Yeah, I got it. Okay. Just freaking out. I don't know why. Okay.
I is still automatically given the value.
what's happening when it says object.word?
So it's
And it just says dummy object, like it's displaying something.
Like even if I declare and I say I.
Why is this not? Do I need to save this as something? I think I need to name it, huh? Wait, hold on. Oh, cool. What is this? 17? All caps. Well, that's because I don't want it to be named same thing that he might have in there somewhere.
But you'll notice that with
It's
checkboxes, they always say
continuing where I had
because
before we left off.
when the name, right? The name
See how
is
close
what
I
that might
was.
be, but also you're gonna send it out.
So it'll literally send.
Well, right, so notice I didn't check by George, I checked the wrong one, right? So when I submit, that's the vehicle in another car and vehicle.
Okay, what is my?
If it's checked. If it's not checked, then it's not checked.
Because even if I say that I is equal to something up here, it still just
Took the class
continues
dummy
to-
and made a prototype object, object.word equals dummy class. And then output, which means.
And so what the book was saying is that if all your checkboxes are related, notice I just named, they were like named vehicle 1, 2, 3. I named them all vehicle 1, right? This would be like, which vehicles do you own, right? And so then if they check these two things and I submit, it actually says vehicle 1 equals car and vehicle 1. Tells you that we're only doing vehicle 1, they checked for this overall checkbox group called vehicle 1.
Okay, so, okay, because you would have the same name, right? So like,
And then once you start integrating into the back end and stuff, you get to the back end. For this, it'll look the same. So just say, vehicle 1 for the car, blah, blah, the back end stuff will do is two.
It's confusing as fuck, but okay.
You get, yeah, I mean, vehicle 1
declare
variable is red.
It'll output that.
Yeah. It's really nice and it's saying.
And it's still 0 and 3.
it does, it's just hard.
We're gonna do a lot of this.
And
Yeah.
really get it.
Because forms are the only way you get down.
Get it,
That's your only interaction.
So this is gonna go, see it, so it's gonna do that.
Okay, so I understand where that, now,
When I hit
yeah, like you
When
have,
I hit submit, right? When I hit submit, the form actually does this. So you don't actually get 4 eyes. You don't actually go to 4
yeah.
But what we do have,
And then
right?
you're ending up with like the last one.
What we do have is that
Before you
have
leave the
input
form.
elements on it, right?
And then so at that point, I think it's saying, it's setting I.
Actually, like, value,
It just doesn't output that inside.
value.
Number 4 is error.
Like it still goes up to 3, and that's when it exits.
Gets that.
So it's either, it's either value
Because there's still, it's still going to take that 2 and add 1 to it, and then it's assigning that value to I, although it's not being output.
Remember,
So then when you
number
call
4, you got
I
error, right?
again,
Yeah.
Yeah. Because of this right here.
It's not declared.
Right there.
Yeah.
This would have been fine.
Yeah,
But
but
when
once
you
you
try to
put
do
that,
that,
it freaks out. It's like, what?
Which is the inverse of this. So this will be fine, I'm assuming. Because it's declared there and there. So in main, the scope, right? And then also specially for the for loop,
So what would
it's
be
got
the
its
output?
own. So the output of this is going to be the incrementing of that.
Yeah.
And then this will just be 0.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I think. So
Exactly what's gonna happen.
it's going to go 1, 2. Pretty sure it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 0.
Number 6 is just, it's not an error, but it's garbage.
Let me see. Int
No, we're gonna go over that, I think, like, one of the last.
It's not an error, but it's
It's
garbage.
gonna be like 646 EIO3.
Hey, is your number 6.4075725 to the 30th power? No, it's not. You're close though. Close. It's the 31st power. Darn it. So close. Yeah, just being the compiler hurts my brain.
I think I started working on the data.
You know what? I don't think so. I think this is gonna be fine. It ran.
What, the number 6?
Mhm.
Is that the only thing in your code?
I mean, I'm just putting it at the bottom of the number 3. So it's not gonna mess with anything.
Why would it be 3?
I'm gonna look at that right now. Okay, so
Let me run it.
no, it's gonna be 0, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Did Luke leave?
He did.
He's still here.
Yeah, well, which of those goes back to the last main scope? I don't know, I got to that point and I was like,
You guys looking at number 6?
yeah, I was tripping on it.
So like,
I think what happens is that
I look at it and I would assume that it either would see out a garbage value, like it would run, but it would be like the under for loop one, right? But when I put it in,
you get 3.
I get
Yeah, it's giving me the
yeah,
same
I
0,
think
1, 2,
that I
3.
figured out why. I'm not positive, but I think that it's the for loop is still adding 1 to it. It's just not outputting that, and so it's assigning I equal to 3
Right.
because it's doing.
Because
Oh, yeah,
here's what I think
it's not initialized. It's not initialized
Well,
here.
no, here.
It's initialized there, but it's just put in there.
Because I isn't initialized in the loop, it's not strictly only for the loop.
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
be it's
Well,
looking for the
even
next
if you
initialized
even if
spot,
you
which is
initialize
in
it
main.
and you say I equals something before the loop begins.
Well, that's what 5 does.
But
So
even if you
you're
do that, it'll still output 3. And I think it's because once it gets to the point in the for loop where it's outputting 2, it still adds 1 to it and it's assigning that value to I.
That's not the part
even
I'm
though it's not
confused about.
outputting
It's
it.
still going to spit that out. So you're getting the value that like when you write it like this, you're asking the for loop, you're asking the program to give you the last value the for loop had that
Yeah.
made it stop
Yeah,
running.
yeah,
So that way you
so-
know you're hitting it. Like that could be like the reason you could write that is to check your error checking and make sure that your for loop's counting the amount of times or iterations you wanted it to count. Does that make sense? So like
I
yeah,
just
that makes
think
sense
that
why that's like that.
It's continuing.
But
It's
the
just
trick we were
continuing
trying
to
to-
assign the
Yeah.
next value to I,
Right.
even though it's
Because it's
not
a global
outputting
variable.
for you.
The
It's a
thing we
global
were
variable.
confused on is until we figured it out just now was that